Hello, my name is Ryan Scott, and I had a near-death experience in 2018 when I was electrocuted and clinically dead for about 11.5 minutes before being resuscitated. I've been a paramedic for 20 years, and I enjoy woodworking. As I mentioned, it helps me relieve stress. I was working on a detailed wood technique called electron burning device, which involves taking a microwave transformer and basically removing all the safety features, then plugging it into a wall outlet. This converts it into 12,000 volts of direct current. This extremely dangerous device essentially burns intricate coral-like patterns into wood. I was with a good friend of mine and we'd been sharing a beer. We were sitting in my workshop, carving this piece of wood. As it happened, he had taken a high-voltage safety course 2 weeks earlier, which is ironic for several reasons. I remember talking to him and moving the electron burning device back and forth when it suddenly arced in my hand. It was like snapping out of reality. The pain was almost unbearable. It felt like every cell in my body was being shattered into pieces. It overwhelmed me to the point that I couldn't comprehend what was happening. It was as if everything shut down, and my entire vision turned into vertical cylinders. I recall seeing an iridescent green moving endlessly, up and down. I tried to form a thought amid the energy, and I believe I thought, I've been electrocuted. Then, I think I thought, I'm falling. And it felt like I was falling for a long time. It was like waking up from a nap in a place I had always known. It was a pure, inky darkness, almost like deep space, where distant lights twinkle like stars. Something like that, but it was just this perfect darkness, and I saw spirals emanating outward from a single point. I wasn't home. I wasn't dead. I was nothing. It was just perfect. Like absolute contentment. I was in that place because there was no connection to anything. It was simply existing in consciousness. Then I felt a certain frequency begin to surround me. They looked like fractal patterns, like gasoline on water. That rainbow effect, it was iridescent in a way. It was just that mix of thoughts, feelings, and emotions. I felt like I was falling apart and merging at the same time. I was going back to the source, to that interconnected awareness or complex web of connection. We all began to be electrocuted together in that moment. I didn't understand what was happening, but looking back, it was me being defibrillated. I was in ventricular fibrillation, which is basically the heart going into spasm. So, I was being defibrillated, and defibrillation takes about 5 seconds. But this felt like a minute. If I can put it that way, I was electrocuted again. Suddenly it stopped, and I became aware that I was dead. I was electrocuted, and now I was in this place, just existing as a being. It felt like a very long time, just being there. Maybe coming to terms with who and what I was, myself, and my place in the universe. Then I began to be electrocuted again, but it wasn't the same. It was the second fibrillation. I remember being pulled, maybe outward, or something like that. At some point, I think I recognized the smell of burnt flesh, which must have been my hands, my burnt fingers. I had third-degree burns, and my hands were bandaged. I was in a coma for about 8 hours, which was fine for me, but problematic for others who thought I had brain death. I remember waking up in the ICU, intubated, with tubes in my lungs and an intraosseous line inserted into the bone of my shoulder. I remember coming back, and my first thought was how much time had passed. I remember being able to write something. My hands were all bandaged, and it had probably been around 8 hours or so, and that amazed me. If someone had told me 5 years or a decade had passed, I would have found that completely plausible. But what was unique about the experiences after I was revived? And the hugs from everyone and everything, was that I remember looking at my things and being able to smell my own scent. Not body odor like needing deodorant, but my natural scent, which we all have because we're primates. It's just that we work so hard to hide it. But I was so hyper-aware. That feeling stayed with me for a long time. Months, really. And I remember telling my wife, this isn't real, but it wasn't real. And she was a bit worried about that. Eventually, I came to accept being in my body and being in space. But you know, I was left with this overwhelming feeling that this is just a stage. It's simply an evolution of consciousness. And you know, there were no anthropomorphic figures or people in robes. It was just returning to the source of everything, which is that infinite consciousness that permeates all. The very space between the subatomic particles as consciousness. And you know, I didn't want to read anything about other people's near-death experiences because I wanted to shape my own interpretation of what happened to me. But you know, I had the typical photophobia, where I wore sunglasses all the time. Even the indoor light was almost blinding for me. Then, one interesting thing was that the burns on my hands healed much faster than expected. They told me I would need skin grafts, but in a very short time, everything recovered and started to heal, which was surprising. I can't say that's common for all people with... But, you know, that was a lot of adjusting to what I now have to call a monkey suit, because it's a lot. It's a limiting filter that I currently exist in. The limitations of my biology. But at the same time, it's so profoundly beautiful that I can simply experience emotions and feelings. The only takeaway I had from all of this was that in that place, when I was without a body, I was very, very aware of the amount of anxiety. The strange emotions that we go through at any given moment. You know, the biological mechanisms, the hormones that drive our behavior. It was a state of absolute tranquility. And again, it was one of those things. When I returned to my body, I felt emotions rise without really knowing what to do with them, because it seemed like I had completely disconnected from everything that is a biological mechanism of data. And now I've come back to this completely. You know, I started using psychedelics later in life, and I feel that the very nature of those experiences is deeply connected to endogenous compounds like dimethyltryptamine and to our bodies and brains that are responsible for dreaming and then dying. I feel that the experience itself has made me profoundly spiritual. I think I used to be superficially spiritual, in the sense that I just used the word without truly understanding its deeper meaning. But it's almost like experiencing it, studying it, scientifically becoming part of it, and then returning to everyday life while still holding that awareness. The awareness that we are just a part of something incredibly complex, infinitely perfect, something that defies language and reason. That's something I've noticed has changed within me, in my personality. It's about simply appreciating the moment, rather than trying to assign meaning to everything, or focusing on plans or words. It's just being able to be present and appreciate what's happening. I notice this a lot with my daughter, just being in the moment and enjoying every bit of it. At the end of the day, the one thing I would tell someone if they asked me about this, or if I hinted at it, is that death is perhaps the most natural thing that happens. Being dead was easy, it was perfect, it was beautiful. Being alive is hard and challenging. I think death itself is just a transition. It's becoming infinite, becoming part of the fabric of the universe. It's being perfect. Someone might argue that we are already perfect, but we just refuse to acknowledge it. Being dead was absolute perfection. I believe the common fear we all share is our mortality, and it's innate. It's wired into our genes. If we didn't fear death, we wouldn't be the creatures we are today. But again, death was simply perfection. It was becoming everything, and it was perfect. I think this has made me spiritually innocent. I used to be spiritual, but only on the surface. Now, spirituality holds a very profound meaning for me, where I viscerally know who we are and where we're all headed, and that knowledge eases much of the fear we experience day to day. Being dead was a state of absolute perfection.